can. All right, they're watching now, so we can speak freely. So you're saying basically you're saying that, like, if we're looking at what we want to dialogos about next, what virtue, you're saying like, actually this whole thing that we've been doing has put me right in the center of where reverence has become kind of at the center of everything that's kind of organizing your.
Yeah, and my image is that it was marked reverence, and it was a key, and it opened the door. I mean, that my idea of what reverence was and all that stuff. I came in like, I've got this key called reverence, right? I don't know what it is. I opened the door, and here we have, like, the whole thing is now open. So I'm not even thinking in terms of a particular little virtue that I'm, holding this thing in my hand. That the whole thing has appeared.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me now to kind of get down. Okay, what's a virtue that I want to explore? Because here,
the whole thing happened.
The whole thing happened.
When you did this, I'm really curious. How does this? You called it just the thing. This is like a realm, a space of time, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be curious, perhaps, what we could explore is how can we hold on that thing, as you called it, that space of time that has suddenly opened up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how does it intersect with our lived lives? As well.
Yeah. And I think that in some sense, you have been, because it's been so concrete on one level. Like, for example, finding yourself going back to Mass. It's been striking to me, right?
Yeah. That's the last thing that I thought would ever happen.
Totally. And having come out of a hardcore kind of Zen tradition where you were wanting a dialogical relationship with the teacher, and he just wasn't having it, right? Which ended up being a kind of a deal breaker for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you came to Dialogos, and then now we start talking about reverence. Something opens up where you find yourself back at the Catholic Church doing Mass, right? And then my understanding is then Daniel introduced you to Nishitani's being in nothingness, which essentially, right, is in some sense, what is Nishitani doing? He's taking the Western philosophical tradition and running it through this sense of nothingness of Japanese, right? And kind of describing it as it intermingles, right? Which is strikingly like your life is in some sense, we're in that dialectic in your life.
Yeah, it's actually the weirdest thing for me. Yes, it really is. And the fact that I'm just kind of like this now the Nishitani stuff, that I mean, it's like, like a magnet for me. And then I practice in the cathedral, which I'm lucky enough to have close by. I practice there. That's where my practice is now. And what I experience there.
I love how you look up as you're talking about it.
Pardon?
I love how you're looking up as you're talking about it.
Yeah, but that picture that Daniel has behind him, with where I'm seeing now the emptiness in this space between the fingers. I mean, I never saw that before, and that I feel the movement of that when I'm practicing in the cathedral in, in silence after the mass is over, which, it's whatever they're doing, that's fine. I'm not, I'm sort of not there for that part of it, the exoteric part of it at all, but the ritual is nice, the ritual is nice, but then after, when I'm sitting in silence, I mean, it's, just amazing.
Yeah.
And then walking out from that sanctuary, which is very big, and and then walking into the world and into my life, and just bringing that to the extent that I mean, the only thing is, I think the only thing is for me that I am aware of how much I need this kind of dialogos. Yeah.
Tanya, were you going to say something?
No, I just thought that was exquisitely beautiful. Really. I mean, that's the reason why I like Nishitani so much, because he dances in between the traditions, and I don't even know why I needed those Japanese writers, so I have more appreciation after all also for my own tradition. Mm-hmm. But it was the case for me. And that dynamic movement of interpenetration, that's kind of like in those two hands, mediated by absolute no-thingness, which is also mediating, I would say, what we are doing right now. When the Dialogos takes up, I would say then we're doing the mediation really right. Then no-thingness is just abundant and provides sense to us and bestows us with this moreness. And we can do this in practice, and that's really the wonderful thing.
Wait, Sandra, when you said, I need this, right? This dialogos, this conversation, right? If we didn't have those words dialogos or the conversation, what would you say this is? What did you mean by this? What is this? Because it's very specific. I'm finding, I think what he says, I really need this.
Yeah.
This seems to be the thing that has all of what we're talking about turn as of recent.
Yeah. Well, and it happened the first time I did your course, the first day when something opened up. It was massive. It was I had to share it with a larger group because I just really felt I had to share this. I knew this was really big. And John called it logos, and that it sort of just clicked right in, And I think, so what I'm saying, I think, is that having discovered what the logos actually is, and how it actualizes itself through our being at the same time we are actualizing it, and we're able to realize it through the dialogue. That is what I'm saying I need it. I'd survive if I didn't have it. I'd sort of be back in the shadows in a sense. I'd survive, I've survived this far, I will. But it just gives me so much life. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Through this. I love that.
Yeah.
Through this. Yeah.
Yeah, really. And I'm just not, it's just so different from all the other social interactions I have, or professional interactions, that I've had. which have been wonderful, but I loved being there for people when they were in their aporia in their lives, when everything had fallen apart. I'm the psychologist. That's such a privilege to share that with people.
Yeah.
But I had a job to do. I was, but this is much, much bigger than this. This is at the level of something I can't quite name. It's certainly not at a personal level.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just feel so incredibly lucky.
Yeah.
And grateful that this has, this has arrived. That's what, because it came to me. Yeah.
Right.
It arrived.
Right.
Yeah.
Funny, I'm thinking about like when you talked about being a psychologist, and I concur, like to talk to somebody and to have a conversation with somebody whose life is what used to have their life make sense no longer has it make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And to be in a conversation with somebody like that where they let you in, there is something stunningly privileged to that. And I sense that thing that you're privileged to, in some sense, is implied in the psychological conversation, right? But not explicated, right? So it's like the way De Janeiro draws out what psyche means in Heraclitus, right? And so in ancient Greek, which is, it's essentially the constitutional openness to the logos is the psyche. It's the way that psyche means the way that we are constituted, right, and constituted by the logos, that openness, right? And so like in a psychological conversation, in some sense, what you start talking about is how it doesn't make sense, mm-hmm, which starts to invite this other sense, or this sense making dimension to open up, and you have these conversations that are right in some sense. But the thing that kind of usually is in that conversation that isn't a horizon that's open in strictly psychological conversation is the logos as such, right? And there's something about this conversation where explicitly, right, we come into it, and by virtue of the very name, this horizon is what gives it, which is the logos as such, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so in some sense, you're talking about it's funny, we're talking about your life, but what it seems to be, we're talking about your life with a view to the thing that's bigger than all of it. Mm-hmm. Right. And in some sense, it's like we're looking at that, talking about your psyche, if you will, right? But that thing's the first to be viewed, and then we're taking it up. Mm-hmm. So in some sense, it's like it's a reversal in the psychological conversation where we're talking about your individual way of making sense or not making sense and all that kind of stuff, and what's implied, right, but not directly approached is sense, what makes sense is what gathers sense as such, right, which is
absolutely
logos, I believe. Yeah.
And yeah, that I love the way you described that, Guy. That's exactly what I mean, I couldn't put words to it. Thank you for putting words to it. Yeah.
Daniel, your head nodded a bunch of different times.
Yeah. No, that with the logos and Ivo De Gennaro, that was very good. He makes this argument that this is the only contingent source that we have. This is the only non-thing or no thing that is actually inexhaustible and can always generate thing. We need to have a philosophical approach, or perhaps a religious approach. This is when we compare to Nishitani's book, then this is exactly what shunyata or emptiness is for the East. And then it's just about what can we practice such that we can hold ourselves in a nearness to that principle and gather or participate in the gathering of sense. And for some reason, whatever we are doing here, this somehow works. I'm also often amazed and baffled why that is. There is, I think I will send this to you. There's a good paper by Ueda, who is Nishitani's student, or was Nishitani's student. And he talks in one paper about Renku, which is what is a chain poetry. So there's one Zen monk who starts with a line of a poem, and then the second poet has the task to expand on this first poem, but not that he gets caught up in his world, but that it is both a linking, but also like building a riffing from that poem. And then we do this a couple of times, always with the task not to be caught up in the world of the other, but to come up with something generally new that is kind of riffing off from it. And Ueda then talks about how in this interpersonal dimension, we can also get in touch with no thingness. And that linking or chain poetry is a kind of example for it. Kind of like in between the worlds, in this in-between space, where we always meet, so to say. It's like with the two hands in that in-between space that's so inexhaustible, but kind of like enabling all of what we are, all of our worlding, so to say. There is, so to say, the space of time where we can realize no thingness. And again, for some reason, this what we are practicing here seems to get at this.
So
it's amazing how it does. I keep thinking of, when two or more are gathered together in my name.
Yeah. And that it's language, right? That the medium of this, right, is language is so interesting. Because I'm watching Teague learn his first words, and I can't tell you where those words are he's learning, like, because it's this collaborative event, right? It's mom hears him say mom. She's like, did you hear that? I'm like, he's going blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden from the kitchen, she's like, did you hear that? He just said mom. Like, I can't hear it, but she hears it, right? And then at some point I hear him saying it, but then I'm like, is he actually saying that? Right? And then there's this three-way thing that we're doing where something like mom starts to form, but it's not like in him, it's not like in us, it's got this ambiguity throughout, but it's almost as the word is what gathers us in realizing it in some deep sense. And I would imagine something like that is going on in conversation, in these kinds of conversations. But what's also interesting about conversations is that when you look at how conversations also can be, which are deeply normative, right? Deeply, in fact, covering over normative, kind of normative, like idle talk, which is this kind of repetition of keeping all of the current ways of thinking about things in existence, in some sense, idling, right? In that sense. So there's also this way that where conversation can be the opposite of recognizing what it's swimming in some sense, right? But in some sense, it seems like what we're doing even right now as we're talking about it is in some sense trying to reach into the source of it as we're doing it, right?
So in order to do that, I think we're all practicing some sort of virtue. I don't know what the name of that virtue is, but I think that's what we have all committed to practicing with each other.
Yeah. See, I keep wondering about this. See, the way it's kind of shown up for me is there's something about the structure of reverence, which I keep overhearing. It's like its structure somehow is just really close to virtue itself, because I'm wondering if that's what we're talking about, right? Is what is that thing that gathers all virtues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's why they call it virtue.
At one point, I think it was you were saying that reverence is the virtue of virtues.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah. That's what I keep like. I'm like, did we pick the first one, like the first one, right? Because what my original thought was via John's sense is like, well, no, we're going to do a bunch of virtues, and then we're going to do virtue itself, right? There's a certain kind of like culmination, but it's interesting. I wonder if we did any virtue, we'd end up there.
I wonder what made you pick reverence?
Well, I think a few different things. One is it's what I've been seeing. It's related to wonder, right? It seems like it to be an enacting of wonder, in some sense, and wonder is the disposition out of which philosophy as such arose, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was something that just seemed like, well, we're going to start anywhere. It just seems like what the very what these conversations already admit is a wonder and a reverence for that, right? Which that sense of moreness.
I can see that. And you wouldn't want to say, well, wonder is a virtue, but wonder is what, wonder seems to me to be so basic to my being that this is what it is.
Right.
At the bottom of it is wonder. So that in order to fully embrace that or experience it or realize it, then the virtue of reverence is the most conducive.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. So when you dropped in wonder, because a couple of things, I was thinking like, well, maybe we want to do it on logos, right? And then when you said wonder, I could imagine doing on a wonder. Perhaps not as a virtue, just as what seems to be kind of coming through here.
What it is,
I mean, if we did it on logos, the thing I would recommend would be in De Janeiro does this great thing where he takes listening to the logos fragment and just unpacks it fully in this really dense, right, explication of essentially what it is to listen to logos, right, of the Heraclitus. I thought maybe it'd be interesting to do a slow reading of that and then take the actual fragment and then do a philosophical contemplation on that and spend our time doing that first. And then the next week, then we pick it up in Dialogos, and about we say what is logos was one of the thoughts I was just thinking about.
So your Heraclitus quote about the gathering?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have it written down too. I can put it in the chat.
Yeah, I have it as well written down. Mhm. Somewhere.
Seems like
Do you
we're just moving
do
towards that. So let's.
Do you
You want to read it?
do you want to shall I read it, the whole
Yes.
thing?
So my thought is like, yeah, read the whole thing. Let's all read. I tell you what, it seems like let's just move into philosophical contemplate or philosophical fellowship, right? Which is slow reading. Then let's pick out the one below it, I believe, which is the actual fragment.
Yeah.
And then we'll do the chanting of it.
Yeah.
Next step is 1 to 2 sentences, right? Kind of summing up, evoking the author. Then the next one is 1 to 4 sentences, doing the same thing, but we start responding to what each other say. And then after a certain period of time, then we go, and then we just go into dialogue, into regular dialogue about it. Sound good? Okay, good.
Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Great. So shall we begin?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's start with a little bit. Let's start with some silence.
Oh yeah, we haven't done that.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Sweet. Okay, I'll time it. Let's do 5 minutes of silence. All right. Get in the silent position and begin. You want to do the slow reading, Daniel?
Yeah, shall I just read the fragment? Yeah.
The expanded one. And
The
then
long, okay.
Yeah. The
And
long,
then the 2 short ones.
yeah. The
Okay,
long-
the fragment is fragment 50 from Heraclitus. And the Gennaro's long explication is this: if you do not listen to me, that is, to my words, as if they were merely a statement of how things are to me and for me, but rather to what my saying indicates, to wit, the Logos, that is, the gathering. If, as a consequence, you yourself mind it and tune into it, and indeed tune in with it, thus owning to your being's native belongingness to it, then an accordance in gathering breaks, a tune in one voice, namely an accordance in which your own gathering, the gathering in which your being consists, belongs to the same with, and indeed gathers the same as, the original gathering, in such a way that your gathering actually gathers the gathering itself, so as to let all things be gathered accordingly. There, in the flagrancy and openness of that accordance, a fitting knowledge of the original gathering holds, the knowledge in which the gathering itself shows as the one atoning all, that is, as the one that, by virtue of its atoning, kindles beings as such and in whole. Or in two more concise versions. First, provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all. Second, listening not to me, but owning to the gathering. Agreement on the same. Fair knowledge breaks. One all.
I suggest we each read the first, that longer one slowly, and then we'll move into the chanting of the shorter one.
My wording is a bit different. The one that I wrote down from what you had sent me before. Can you put it in the chat, Guy?
Yeah. Well, then that may be, I may have the same wording then. Hang on a second. Here we go.
It's a bit different than Daniel's, especially about the accordance. You're gathering accordingly. Yeah.
Could be my dyslexic typing. There you go.
Great. Thank you.
Can you see it okay?
Yeah. Should we do it in unison?
Yeah, no, you go ahead and read it once.
Or me? Okay. If you do not listen to me, that is to my words, as if they were merely a statement of how things are to me and for me, but rather to what my saying indicates, to wit, the logos. That is the gathering. If, as a consequence, you yourself mind it and tune into it, and indeed tune in with it, this owning to your being's native belongingness to it, then an accordance in gathering breaks, attuning one's voice, namely, an accordance in which your own gathering, the gathering in which your being consists, belongs to the same with, and indeed gathers the same as, the original gathering, in such a way that you're gathering accordingly. That was what was somewhat different from what Daniel read.
There's one line missing.
Yeah. What's the line, Daniel?
What was the last word that you said?
In such a way that you're gathering, and then what I have is just accordingly. The original gathering in such a way that you're gathering.
Actually gathers the gathering itself, so as to let all things be gathered accordingly. Few words are missing.
Yeah.
Shall I say it again?
Yeah, so as actually gathers together in itself, yeah.
Yeah. So as to let all things be gathered accordingly.
Okay, that makes more sense. Okay, so I'll just read that. Okay. Then an accordance in gathering breaks, a tune in one voice, namely an accordance in which your own gathering, the gathering in which your being consists, belongs to the same with, and indeed gathers the same as, the original gathering, in such a way that your gathering actually gathers together in itself, so as to let all things be gathered accordingly. There, in the flagrancy and openness of that accordance, a fitting knowledge of the original gathering holds, the knowledge in which the gathering itself shows as the one atoning all. That is, as the one that, by virtue of its atoning, kindles beings as such and in whole.
All right. I will put in the chat. I'd say let's do this fragment. And we can go into the chanting. So let's go around and chant it once we go, is it 5 times? Yeah, 5 times each. And I'll go first. I'll go first, then Daniel, and then Sandra, then Guy, Daniel, Sandra, in that order. Okay. Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself, and accordance in gathering gives rise to the fit knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
And here's the last round. Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourself into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Provided you listen not to me, but gather yourselves into the gathering itself. An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge. One atones all.
Okay, now we go into short, I think it's called short speech. And this is where we say one, maybe two sentences in which our intention is to invoke the author. To, in some sense, invoke Heraclitus, evoke what he is calling forth and gathering. One, two sentences. Same order, I'll go first.
Mhm.
Heraclitus is begging me to follow his finger backwards. His pointing finger backwards.
Is Heraclitus transtemporally gathering the Logos for us?
Is Heraclitus inviting us to see through the words that arise from his mouth into that which forms the words?
Heraclitus Oh, you want us to look and notice it's in the shadow.
Am I atoned right now by the Logos?
If I dispose myself to that which connects us through language without being attached to the language, I am enacting the atoning.
You so want me to hear my listening.
Attempting to listen to the knowing of the Logos is the lightest and simultaneously the most difficult thing.
The atoning is love.
The gathering you're asking me to hear is already in the listening I'm hearing with. You tricky bastard.
The gathering attunes me to wonder, and all of our sayings are inhabiting this space of wonder.
That which gathers us is already, always.
And now 2 to 4 sentences, and we can respond to what we're hearing from each other. same order. Heraclitus is pointing to what is beyond his pointing. Following it, I end up in hearing. Already begun by what he pointed at.
I wonder how we can bring our voices in tune with the gathering, such that we speak out of the logos and not about it, and we do listen not to what we are saying, but to the gathering itself.
I hear you, Daniel, at a point of wonder in that point of awareness of the words and awareness of that which the logos, and wondering how to hear both.
That point, I see and drawn into that point as it itself is a gathering, that in seeing its gathering, I find myself already gathered, instructing me not to hold on.
Instructing you not to hold on, but to continually explore the farness of the affordance of the logos. That seems to be the task that Heraclitus calls us for.
So the point, which is actually not a point in space, but an always expanding, always atoning all space of listening and communicating. And that point is the expansion itself.
He asked me to not hear his words, but what his words indicate. Who is he speaking too when I hear that way.
I'm just now I'm overwhelmed with mystery, and I have no idea who we are listening to, what we are in the first place, why we can do these miraculously wonderful things. It's just great and lovely.
I hear the joy and the celebration of the mystery of the ourselves that Heraclitus is calling to.
I listen to your hearing and see his joy as the aspect of gathering the dimension that he can't explain that opened up. It's the last round.
The holding sway of the Logos helps me to find a home in this world.
The mystery and the joy and the wonder are your home.
We can open up into free speech, so no order. A noticing of gathering, and a noticing of not knowing that is maybe the source of what's gathering.
An accordance in gathering gives rise to the fitting knowledge, which is knowledge of not knowing.
Hearing fitness differently now.
This fitting of fair knowledge also implies that our own being finds its way to what Nishitani would call our home ground, where we can self, or where we are at home with ourselves. And I just feel right now so at home with myself. Almost, maybe we can say we're enacting what Ivo would call skole. So like true leisure, true sufficiency. And that's just, that it's just very good. It feels very soothing.
With my thinking mind, my analytic mind, my day-to-day mind, I think I know what's going on, and I know now I have absolutely no idea what's going on from that mind. And I also know that engaging in this exploration together brings me to a place of joy and absolute wonder that I don't even, it's a kind of wonder that I don't even have this wonder, I am this wonder. That's the difference. It's not that I have, I am in a state of wonder. It's that wonder is such a release.
Noticing our disposition of fitness. And I look out and see the chimney rusted at the top on the rooftop of the neighbor, and the tree in the foreground with the light just glowing the tips into a deeper shade of darker green, and hear the sound of my own voice and remember the echo of your voices as all part of this disposition of fitting that is already gone and arrived. It's gone is arrived. Now having a sense of something like emptiness in a new way of showing. It's non-self.
I see those hands behind Daniel and they're breathing. They're alive.
Seeing feels like an open hand right now. And then resting back into the center of that hand, and it is not a hand. The hand is gone. Nothing is held on to, but everything's gathered and everything's included.
One atones all.
Noticing the constant already included in everything. This way in which everything, including the thoughts that are inconsistent with this, are themselves gathered as the showing of what they are, which is showing themselves gathered. This already sense in which if I go to look at it, I just see the aspects that they gather, but perceive the gathering. Logos is occurring to me very, something like a trickster. Right now.
Mm.
Benevolent one.
To play in the fields of the Lord. Never be pinned down. But always calling, always beckoning.
Seems like there's something within the gathering that is also releasing. There's this continual releasing of what's gathering. In the moment of perceiving it, it's already released and beyond itself. And I can hear this way that this instruction of Heraclitus, which is listen through, like not to my words, but through my words and to what my words indicate, right?
In this movement that you just enacted, Guy, I'm just trying to feel myself into that movement of steady releasing, clearing, opening, gathering. I can become myself, the very openness of flagrancy of the Logos.
There's something following hearing and listening, which in some way seems necessary. Hearing and listening somehow. And that hearing, if you go back far enough, it's connected with belonging. And in some sense, what we hear is an already belonging to what we're hearing and to the world. We can hear our belonging. And the hearing is a belonging, already announced in some sense.
the gathering itself.
I'm hearing both the it's and the self as something more like dances.
Plays, dances, joyful.
Play. Play. Daniel face smiled. Play. Sandra smiled. And
Guy smiling.
What is the other fragment from Heraclitus? Time as a child playing with marbles, something.
Oh.
time.
Mhm.
Play. Time. In that way, there's the trickiness, right? The tricksteriness of the mercurial, hermetic sense of, and Hermes interpretation, hermeneutic circles, this way where
Mm.
nothing is in its atomistic self, but that way that the future, the moment it becomes present is the moment it becomes past. Like this way that you can't grab on to the present in something that you can have, but it's already slipped away in a forward from itself. So there's this sense of time that seems essential.
And reveals it, peeks around the corner and then disappears. And
Through, shows itself through
Mhm.
to what is indicated, but then is already gone.
Yeah. Oh, there it goes.
There's a deep lesson here. There's something deeply inherently educational, just like this fragment. Every single part of that fragment was demanding that you do the thing that you're reading while it itself is revealing that you are doing the thing that you're reading. It's like in order to understand what that fragment is saying, it walks you into being what that fragment is saying. It's like that fragment is deeply instructive in terms of embodiment.
It's the diving logos, not the dialogos, the diving right in, diving into the logos. I think we should call it diving logos. Diving, that's what we do. We dive in.
See the swim trips marketed for those. Where your logos, speedos.
Deep sea divers.
There's something here that has been part of at least my thinking about logos for a long time, which is there is this way where logos even historically, if you look at historically what it has meant, right? In this early sense in which this is the beginning of it, what we're reading here, it's got this kind of gathering that shows but conceals and withdraws in its showing. It's very gathering, right? And it's got this dynamical sense, right? This gathering, releasing itself as gathering, organizing anything you could hold on to, but unhold-onable itself. Then into word, right? Then into proposal and proposition, right? Then into order, right? Then into reason. Then into things like the account, your account of something, right? And it's interesting because there's this kind of element where it seems like there's the something like the dynamic of the logos, which is what this fragment highlights, right? This dynamicism that's embodied and released as the body it's released as, right? And then the product of the logos is something like the thing that we then, the proposition that we can then stand over and against and reflect on. And then those very things can become, I mean, the whole Republic in some sense is about this way that the logos, the dynamic can go away and the product of that dynamic becomes this thing that can be pernicious as hell and stagnant and fall apart, right? And I'm sensing that in just as we go into the logos and try to speak this through this dynamical sense, it's this way that it's tight. It's like there's nothing, in some sense, there's nothing you can hold on to. And everything is through it. That's the instructions of all of it. And it's constantly regenerating itself and re-upping it and renewing itself, right?
And defies the mind attaching, defies that.
Yeah. And in this way that it also reveals the very way that the mind is trying to gather.
Yeah. Shows it for what it is.
Front, and it's a disassembling and assembling. So this is a couple of things that like a few lines that have been floating around is like this, the way that Vervaeke's been talking about the hermeneutics of beauty and the hermeneutics of suspicion, right? And that when the hermeneutics of suspicion loses sight of that, of that, when you catch something in a lie, or you catch something as concealing, or you catch something as that already is announcing and presupposing that there's something that isn't a lie, there's something that is. But if you lose sight of that and you get this, right, this sense of where truth itself becomes catching suspicion, right? It's truth itself becomes the revealing of what's worthy of suspicion, as but not revealing the sense of beauty, right? That affords that in the first place, right? I'm hearing that in this, and I think that one of the things about Dialogos, right? Again, through logos, right? Hearing through logos in the conversations, like this whole sense is in some sense also historically speaking, and this is happening in the midst of a period of time where perhaps where conversation has become the most toxic, right? In some way, that there's something also about what is gathering in this conversation in Dialogos as such, is this restoration of of the hermeneutics of suspicion in realizing it through into the beauty, right? So I just want to bring, there's that thread that's also coming into this dialogue.
The toxicity of discourse in that time.
Yeah.
Similar to the toxicity in our time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah,
Which
we're
is
all through
which-
lines. Yeah, we're all the through lines, right? In some sense, are things like become things like racism, right?
Yeah.
Through lines we
Yeah.
see things like
Injustice.
colonialism, right? And that those things become those very kind of insights then become gobble up the world, where everything becomes about that. Everything
Mhm.
becomes about
Mhm.
like racism or colonialism or all the different things were.
Yeah. Yeah. Isms. Yeah.
And that the logos is in some sense revealing those things as through lines,
Mhm.
right? But it's also by virtue of seeing it, being able to be suspect of it, already announced that there's something in contrast to that affords that to be suspect in the first place. So this way that Heidegger talks about truth as the unconcealedness, right? That concealment and unconcealment are vital in truth.
Right.
All of that seems to be woven in to what we're talking about here.
I wanted to dwell on what Sandra said before, the diving into the logos. I really like that for one simple reason, that I think the two of you just explicated now very well. If we stick to a hermeneutics of suspicion, we are perpetually not listening to the logos, because we have our suspicions. We don't want to dive into it. While in the other mode, let's say where we are curious, where we want to own our native belongingness to the logos, then perhaps something like a hermeneutics of beauty, a hermeneutics of kind of like a perpetual revelation can come about, where this is not a kind of static informational proposition, but it's a kind of like I don't know, an invitation into the abiding, the realm of the logos, with which we can always participate with it. And that through line is always open, because we are in a native belongingness to it. We can always, we're always open to that. And I'll just throw this out for me, that perhaps the virtue, there seems to be a necessity for a virtue that lets us or invites us or tunes us to this participation in the hermeneutics of beauty, to this owning to the native belongingness of the original gathering of the logos. And I wonder now what that virtue is.
So what you're talking, I want to draw out what you just said. So you're posing a question, right? And the question is what is this virtue that's native, right, to the hermeneutics of beauty, right?
Yes, we can participate in
Right.
that
Yes.
hermeneutics of beauty, and then also with this attunement of wonder.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Yes. And this specifically you're saying is like, what is it? What is that virtue that affords us to dive in?
Mm.
Right? Which is what the hermeneutics of suspicion in its losing of beauty doesn't do. What is this diving in, right, that affords this beauty?
The diving really resonated with me, because the diving is usually, when we just think about it, if you go somewhere, if you want to dive into the depths of the ocean, usually there's something needed for that. That's even what we are doing here is, I think there's something, most people would maybe say, oh, I don't feel ready for this. I lack something in my being. Now, how can what is the virtue that helps us to cultivate this, what we are lacking in our being, so that we do not go maybe the easy road to the hermeneutics of suspicion, but perhaps have the more difficult road to the hermeneutics of beauty.
Interesting. Just as a side note, encircling the fourth stage of circling, which is the center stage, is called the deep sea diver.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah. And specifically, it's about the transition into the water, right? Into the differentiated yet determinate, right? So like you in the form of circling translates into like, being with intense emotions and inviting those up and diving into them, right? The sense of this, there's something renewing about that and transforming about that, and even death provoking in the transformative sense. That sense of, yeah, you're right. There is a sense in diving that something's needed, right? You can't just do it. You can't just jump in the water. Like your system will you'll bounce back up, right? So what is it that affords this dive? And what are the preconditions? Like, it seems like there's a set of preparedness. So you're saying in one sense, I'm hearing a couple of different questions. I'm like, well, what is it that allows you to be prepared? But what is the virtue? I'm also hearing is like, what is the virtue that has you dive in? But is that also the same virtue that has one prepared dive?
And then you also need a virtue to keep diving, because whenever you dive, you don't know what you will encounter when you dive. It's the same thing with shadow work. You don't know what's down there. Anything could come up, and then you need something, so you can just let whatever show itself. So and then you still need something, so you keep diving.
So we might think of virtues,
but dive in through me. So just to listen to that, look at that virtue again and hear it ring differently. Provided you listen not to me, but rather dive into the gathering.
not to me, but rather to what my saying indicates here, to dive in. I'm wondering if we would want to look at the virtue of faith or courage, because those two things are coming up. I mean,
I thought in the very beginning, I thought about faith. Faith is also very courage. It seems to me that courage and faith are like two sides of the same coin.
They're very much intermingled. Yeah.
Yeah.
They both certainly reinforce each other. But would that be an idea for next time?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the differences between courage and faith? Off the top of your head, they're two sides of the same coin. I would imagine I'm imagining courage. Courage has this element of like kind of in some sense knowing you could die, right? Knowing, there's got this element of knowing, and faith doesn't seem to connote the same thing.
It doesn't seem the same thing, did you say? Or it does?
Like, where courage seems like in order to be courageous, I need to know that something's dangerous to choose to walk through it. Faith seems to be something else.
Yeah, well, for courage, it sort of feels to me like there's an element of defiance, and faith is a faith that is a movement towards. Courage is kind of what defending like this, it doesn't move forward. Faith is drawn out.
I love
the movements are different.
Yeah, exactly. I think your body said it all. Courage is more turning to the self, and faith is more turning outwards to the principle.
What am I'm already released in.
Yeah.
Turning towards what I'm already released towards. Yeah. Faith. Let's
go for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Right on.
I've been looking at that a bit. So that would be fabulous.
Yeah.
Next time.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe this will be the Catholic Church down the street. I'm curious about this. I'm gonna go. They have mass at 8:30 every morning. I'm gonna.
You keep threatening to, Guy. I wonder if you have the courage to do
that. Yeah. Well, do I have to dress it? Do you have to dress up for mass? No. Okay.
No. Perhaps only if there's a major like Easter, Christmas. There, I think it's a little bit more appropriate maybe to dress well, perhaps.
Yeah, well, there was a homeless guy there, and he wasn't dressed up too well, so I think.
But it's okay if
it's just fine.
It's not a.
Yeah. I was gonna say I can just go in there after I can go after my runs.
Yeah.
I'm sure God wants me in shape, so.
You could maybe I don't know where exactly you live. You could maybe go to Paul Vanderklay's church and listen to kind of like something that he thinks about John's work. Or so.
Yeah, he's like he's in Sacramento. That's a few hours away. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so next time.
Yes.
Faith.
This was awesome, you guys. Thank you so much.
Fabulous. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.